Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Chamber Business Breakfast. I was so worried about the weather, and here we are. So I just want to say thank you first to Lanel Community Partnership Office, who sponsors these breakfasts, to our wonderful hosts, UNMLA. We always provide a challenge for them, and they rise to the challenge every time. Our caterer this month is Muy Salsa. I want to just tell them thank you so much. What a great spread out there. Try the Mexican coffee, you won't be disappointed. And I also want to say thank you to Pack 8 for coming and recording today. We have Jean and her intern, Christina, today. So thank you for joining us, Christina. I also want to just say thank you to Sandy Jones for coming today. I'd like to introduce our new SBDC director, Miss Sandy Jones. So welcome, Sandy. We all look forward to working with you. And just real quickly, I want to say we are doing a ribbon cutting today, right next door to UPEX, where Bennett's used to be, is opening this morning as Yaz's Elevated Jewelry and Gifts. And we're going to do a little ribbon cutting there at noon. If possible, please join us and say welcome. The young lady that bought UPEX is starting this gift shop. She's done a great job, so please come out and support all of our new businesses, and we hope to see you at noon. It's 107 Central Park Square, so very good. And now it's an honor to have our House Representative Christine Chandler here with us today. They had a very intense 2022 legislative session earlier this year, and we're honored to have Representative Chandler here to give us her highlights. I'd like to start out by saying congratulations on House Bill 163.
Yeah, that's something.
That's really great work. Thank you for all you do. And I will let you take it away. Everyone, please welcome.
Hi. Well, it's great to see all of you, and there are some new faces whom I do not know, so I think I'll introduce myself a little bit. I know a number of you very well, but some of you I don't think I know all that well, so let me just tell you about myself. My name's Christine Chandler. I have lived in this community for about 28 or so years. I worked at the laboratory for a long time. I'm an attorney, so I was an in-out house attorney, worked with Bill Watt a lot, and enjoyed that part of my life and career very much. It was a lot of fun. So I left the lab, 10 or so years ago, and went into private practice for a little while. Ran again for county council. I had previously run in, I think, 1997, and then I ran again in 2007. Won that election, and then this seat, which is House District 43, became open because our great representative then ran for land commissioner, and happily she's won, and she's running for election, by the way. And I was successful in that effort, and I'm running this year. It will be my third term, and so far I am unopposed. So that's a nice thing to be able to say, so I can focus on other things besides running for re-election, although I will be helping some of my colleagues in the north to get re-elected. There are challengers there, and Bill and I share a friend who I'm going to be helping. Representative Susan Herrera has an opponent in the primary, and I'm looking forward to supporting her. She's a great representative and loves Los Alamos, has worked with Los Alamos for a long time. She was the head of the Lanel Foundation for a long time and supports education and so on. So I will be busy and doing a number of things. A little bit about myself in the House and what I do in the House. As I said, I've been in office. This is my fourth legislative session, so I'm finishing my second term. Since I was elected, I was on House Taxation and Revenue, a very important committee, as you would imagine, probably second to the Appropriations Committee in terms of importance. Just this year, I was made chair of the committee when our floor leader, now floor leader, Javier Martinez, was elevated. And so we have a really great team on House Taxation and Revenue, a very serious group of people. The speaker is on the committee, so I have to manage the speaker and the floor leaders. It's not an easy job. Both of whom have a lot of opinions about tax policy. It was an interesting experience this year. I should also say I am on the House Judiciary, which is also another significant committee with a very heavy workload. And this year especially, I found particularly challenging. And I don't really have a good answer as to why, although I have some speculation. And by challenging, I mean it was very intense. People seemed to be cranky a lot of the time, and I can't quite understand why, but we were. It's interesting when we have such a strong funding revenue stream to be cranky and kind of combative on things. But I was expecting a relatively calm session. If it had been me and I was running for and I am running for re-election, but I don't set the agenda for the session, I would have thought we would have tried to do kind of low-hanging fruit issues, relatively calm issues, happy issues, people that, that really didn't happen. There were a lot of controversial things that happened. There's something called the hydrogen hub thing, which I'm sure many of you probably know a lot about that, Philo. Hydrogen hub was very, very controversial. The environmental groups were very much opposed to it, and it really pitted some of us against one another. I tried to keep an open mind on it and was leaning and trying to find ways to support it. Frankly, I think it was an important initiative that we need to be following up on, and we may next year. But it was very intense in terms of the kind of lobbying we were hearing. But let me step back a little. For those of you who are not as familiar with how our system works in New Mexico, and it's different from a lot of places, is we have two types of legislative sessions, and they alternate. So in 2020, an even year session is a budget session, typically called a budget session, and a revenue session. So that's usually taxes, things like that. That, as a matter of law, is an appropriate thing to file bills on, and we do, and we had plenty of bills to be filed. In addition, constitutional amendments are germane or can be filed as well, and they can be heard. That is an appropriate thing to consider during the session. In addition, the governor controls the agenda, frankly, for a 30-day session, and she sets what else we can hear. And I don't know how many other states do it that way. Some of us are concerned about that because it limits our legislative prerogatives. And so she set the call, what we call the call. And what we legislators do is we go upstairs and try to get our bills on the call. Some of us carry governor's bills, and we know those are going to be on the call, but we go and lobby to get our stuff done. So we have to go seek her good graces when we wish to have a bill that's not typically within the definition of what we can do. Next year, an odd year, we can file on any number of issues, any array of issues that's appropriate for the state legislature to consider. So we, of course, will focus on the budget, taxes, and any other kind of issue the legislature feels is appropriate. And that's a 60-day session. Do I think either of these sessions are long enough? I do not. There's been a lot of talk in recent times to change how we do business. We are a volunteer legislature. We get per diem for the time that we are in session and for when we are in committee hearings during the summer. But we are not compensated for any of the other time that we work on behalf of our citizens. And that, in my opinion, limits the number and types of people who can participate. So if you're a private business owner, sometimes you can if you have staff who can take care of your business. If you're a lawyer, often you can if you have partners that will help you watch your cases during the session. But if you're a young mother, it's very hard. And there were announcements this year of young mothers who could not sustain participating in the session. We have very long hours when we are working, especially during the session times. This year, I can count 2, and there may have been more, where we went all night. I mean all night, starting at 8 o'clock or so, because many of us have committee hearings that start at 8:30, some start at 8 o'clock, some start at 9 o'clock in the morning. We're having committees. We break for a session usually, so we may vote on some legislation or hear memorials or do various business things somewhere around between 11 and 2. We go back to committees for a while, and then around 6 o'clock or so, we come back. And sometimes it's a short, we'll work till 8 or 9, but there were times when we were 11, 12, 1 a.m., 3 a.m., 2 a.m., all the way through the evening. We did have a couple of those sessions. The House, and I'm touting the House's horn right now, we work. And we kind of laugh at the Senate because they get agitated if they have to stay till 10 o'clock. But we are working through the night. It's really true. We do, and I'm very proud of the fact that we take our work seriously. It's a strain, though, and sometimes I wonder how we do it, and just in terms of clarity of thinking at 3 a.m. And we have members that are in their 70s who do this. And I'm just incredibly impressed in how they sustain themselves, because it's long, and we are sleeping on couches in the lounge, and we asked to be called when the votes are called. So that's how it is, and that's how it was this session, much to my surprise, as I said. So that's kind of an overview of how we do business for those of you who haven't, been following us as closely as others. There were 105 bills filed, so obviously not all of them were budget bills or tax bills. And the House passed 250 of them, and the Senate filed 250 and 255. 64 passed. So those were ones that were either met the criteria in that they were financial related bills, or received a call, or were governor's bills, and of course they received a call. I worked on a couple of governor's bills. But we are doing very well financially in the state right now. This state tends to have these kinds of big swings in our revenues. We rely very heavily on oil, the price of oil, to sustain us. And right now, the price of oil is over $100 a barrel. And you can tell when the state's doing well just by looking at the prices at the pump. So it's kind of a mixed bag for me, because I love getting revenue to support our schools and our senior centers and our libraries and our infrastructure and all of those important things that we do. But you usually often see it at the pump, and you can tell how we're doing just based on that. Of course, there's a bit of an anomaly this time because of the war, and that has impacted the price of oil to a degree that we hadn't. But it was going up even before the and we have very productive wells in the Permian Basin, which is why I think we're second. We vacillate between second and first in terms of production levels in the country because of the Permian Basin and how the ease of production and the cost of production is very, very low there. So it's a mixed bag. We know that. When we budget, we know that. So this year, yes, we did have a significant increase of 14% in the budget, which is, significant, and that is allowing us to invest in the schools, which we haven't done sufficiently for quite some time. We, of course, are investing in all of our departments, in environmental, our economic development department. I'll talk a little bit about that, and that's on page 2 of the sheet if I don't get to it, because I feel myself droning on here. But we are conscious of that, and we keep very high reserves as a result. So we are operating at 30% reserves with a budget increase of 14%. So that is extremely significant. The county's financial policy, if I remember correctly, is a 20% reserve, and that's more typical of what is done, and even that is a very conservative reserve. But we are aware of the fluctuations, and as we have a very strong chair in Chairwoman Lundstrom, and she is conservative, and that is generally accepted to be true. She is more conservative than I am on many, certainly social issues, but she is a fiscal conservative. There's no debate about that. She's from the western part of the state in Gallup. But she's been doing her work for a long time. She knows the budget inside and out, and she works very closely with staff so that we have a prudent budget. My sheet talks a little bit about the various increases. We did budget for a $15 an hour wage for all state workers. Public education spending increases by a little bit more than 12%. And we have been increasing public education spending for since I've been in office and since this governor has taken over, which is almost 4 years now. Taxes, yeah, I mean, it's very important work we're doing in terms of education. And I see Cindy back there, and we have been increasing spending and programs in support of higher ed as well, which I know she knows, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Let me see, taxes, this was my first year as tax chair, and we had quite a package this year. It's probably the biggest tax relief package ever in the state. It's approximately $500 million of monies that we are returning to middle and low income New Mexicans across the board, really. I was a champion for the child income tax credit. That is a tax credit that will go to anyone who has children in the state. Now, it's on a scale in terms of income, but it will go to anyone. It's similar to the federal program that had been giving a tax credit to people with children, but it was not renewed in it expired at the end of this year. And due to the dysfunction in Washington, they have not been able to pull that out of their hat. Perhaps they will. But ours is embedded in law. It will start next year, I will say that. And that's just an point I'm making. Tax rebates. The Senate was very keen on tax rebates this year. $250, $500 for married. There is a means test associated with that. The governor was very keen. This is a mixture of priorities for both bodies and the governor. The governor was very keen on trying to drop the GRT, which is a very, very hard thing to do unless you can find replacement revenue. This rebate, I think, over 2 years, that was the compromise with the legislature, will amount to $190 million. So every eighth of a point is like $90 million or $100 million. So to replace that kind of revenue is a big deal, and it's going to be a real challenge. We all know we need to drop the GRT in the state. It's very high. It is our primary source of income in the state for the state's budget. And as a result, we rely heavily on it. And over the years, and I won't go into all the details, but the base has been narrowing due to actions of prior and us legislators. Social Security was a big issue this year. The exempting Social Security from taxation, that happened. There is a means test, but it's a pretty high one. It will encompass most middle class and low income seniors who receive Social Security. We also provided some tax relief to military pensions, and we renewed and expanded the solar market tax credit, and there were a few other smaller items. One that the House really wanted to follow up on was the tax credit for nurses this year. Those yes, thank you for your service. We all benefited, really, from the hard work and sacrifice of nurses, particularly those working in hospitals. And this was proposed to us by the Nurses Association, and we were happy to support. You'll note, I mentioned the $500 million that we're putting into the economy this year. That's a big deal. It really is. Education. One of the things we've been told for a long time is we don't pay our teachers enough. Everybody in this room probably thinks that, and I do too. And now we have the way to pay for it, and we are paying for it. We've increased the levels by $10,000 each. In addition to that, teachers and actually all school employees are going to get an average of 7% increases. So we are now starting to address teacher pay in earnest. And we're getting serious about it. And I'm really pleased that that's happening. We need to start recruiting teachers back into the workforce. It's been a tough 2 years for educators on all levels. through higher ed, no question about it. And we need to do more. The Opportunity Scholarship we added money to, it's going to be expanded. That will be a bigger thing that will allow people to get to college who can't afford it. And it will, frankly, anyone who's eligible can apply. It is not a means-based scholarship. And people who have been working for a while and maybe raised a family will be eligible. You know, some people take time off, 10 years, 20 years, to deal with personal issues, maybe to raise the money they feel they need to go to school, save it. The Opportunity Scholarship will be available to them. And we also added additional monies to the Lottery Scholarship, which has been at risk at various times, and we've not been able to fund fully, but we've been looking for ways to fund things on a one-time basis as well as a recurring basis, because we recognize that revenues are volatile, so let's look for one-time things. So there has been a lot of investment in infrastructure programs, funds for broadband. Across the board, we are trying to find important areas that have been needing funding for a long time, especially those where we could just sock it for once or twice a year and not have to worry about recurring problems, recurring funding. So that certainly was an objective. I'm sure all of you have been hearing about the crime problem, mostly in Albuquerque and maybe some of the other metro areas. This was a very controversial collection of proposals, and it was because there is concern among some of us, me included, that these kind of, let's increase penalties, let's have mandatory sentencing, doesn't work, hasn't worked from the 90s forward, it just doesn't. What we need really is, and the studies show this, you need law enforcement to be able to apprehend criminals quickly. If a criminal thinks that they have a better than 50% chance of not being apprehended and not being prosecuted, that is the problem. It is not whether they're contemplating whether there's a 15-year penalty or a 20-year penalty. They don't do that calculation. What the risk calculation is, am I going to get caught and am I going to be prosecuted swiftly? That studies across the country show that, and we did fund police more heavily. We invested more in prosecutors in terms of pay wages. We have invested in public defenders, and we are investing in the courts. We increased the number of judicial seats in some areas of the state. More needs to be done. I was disappointed to see the governor pocket vetoed raises for judges. Our judges are paid at a very low rate. So if you want quality judges who have, esteemed careers, you have to pay them, because they can make $300,000 or more in the private sector, and when you're offering to pay them $100,000 to be a judge under some pretty difficult circumstances, especially these last 2 years where the courts were as impacted as schools were in terms of managing their caseloads in COVID, and so we're disappointed that the governor pocket vetoed that. One of her explanations was it needs more study. Well, we've been studying the judge salary issue for 10 years, maybe longer, and certainly these last 4 years it's been an issue that we've been studying for quite some time. So it's not a new issue, it's something we've been frankly neglecting, and it's disappointing. But we did invest more in the justice system, and we invested significantly in behavioral health programs, pretrial intervention programs, all of those things to make our system better. My only concern is we have the money, but now we need the people. Our departments across the board in the state are understaffed. And when you don't have the staffing to be able to implement programs and to spend the money, you're going to be stymied for a while until we're able to do that. And it's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing. We need to start recruiting people so they can actually implement things that we value. We did, of course, invest more in the economic development. We all recognize we need to diversify the economy, and we've been working in that direction. Economic development got 19% increase. So that will help, I hope, you. They intend to invest that money in many different programs, including, I understand, having more regional reps to work with local entities. So I'm hoping that you all will benefit from that. We put more money into the tourism department. Tourism, of course, was hurt through the pandemic, and so 16% increase for tourism. We have to reinvigorate our tourism in the state. We added some money to the Jobs Incentive Program. LEDA got more money. That's a fund that's used to attract businesses here. Money for regional representatives, I mentioned that. Okay. An issue that's important to many people in the state, and I heard a lot from Los Alamos residents on this one, and that is what is sometimes referred as payday lending. It's really not that anymore, but it's these small installment loans, you know, these $500 loans, $1,000 loans that people need desperately. They often don't have strong credit ratings for whatever reason, so they go to these storefront lenders and they're taken advantage of. We had a cap of 175%, I'm not joking, per annum. And that was down from no cap at all ages ago. Well, maybe 5 years ago, maybe not even that long ago. We have now brought it down to 36%, and there's a reason for that number. That's the number that the federal government says you can charge members of the military. Because, you know, these young men and women who've been in the military have been taken advantage of too, in terms of these kind of small loans and loans and so on. So we pegged it, and that's typical for those states who have adjusted for these installment loans. This is a very important bill, and my dear friend Susan Herrera was the lead on this, and believe me, she took a beating. Believe it or not, she did. The payday lenders or the installment loan companies have very strong lobbies. And they were out in force. They come out in force every time this is talked about. So it takes, you know, intestinal fortitude to be able to pursue this. And bless my, my dear colleague's heart, she took it on, and some of my colleagues helped push it over the finish line. I sponsored the tax initiative as chair of the tax committee. I helped craft what we were going to do and carry it through the House, the floor, and the Senate. The Senate's an interesting body to deal with, but it can be done. You have to lay the groundwork, believe me. Something that I really was important to me this year and was my legislative priority, in addition to, of course, to the tax package, which is what we work on every year, is this constitutional amendment to the anti-donation clause, and that was House Joint Resolution 1. This was prompted last year by our work on the broadband initiative that I did with a number of legislators. And I co-sponsored this with Representative Anthony Allison from, I think where he's from is Fruitland, which is in the Navajo area. He's a Navajo member. We were getting a lot of pushback from the IT department at the state and the transportation department. We'd say, well, why can't you go in and fund the putting in broadband services to houses? You know, low income, we're mostly thinking, but why can't you? Well, because the anti-donation clause says we can't. And we had a lot of money coming in, we have a lot of money coming in, and this was a barrier for our ability to have more direct access for people to broadband and other resources. When you start thinking about the state, broadband brought it to us, you know, on the forefront of our minds, but we still have people who do not have running water, who rely on failing septic systems, do not have access to a strong wastewater system still. In rural New Mexico, that is the case. And it is not cost effective for a lot of entities to do it because there are such wide division, you know, separation between houses. It's very costly to install. So we are looking to find ways to create programs that will help people get direct access, and this is the first step in doing so. It requires what we call implementing legislation, which is legislation that will set the parameters for these programs. But that is going to be on the ballot, and I encourage you to support it. Once it's passed, we'll be talking. Highway Department's another one. They have tons of right-of-ways across the state. Well, we'd say, well, couldn't you like cut the price for right-of-way access in these rural areas for the providers? Well, we can't do that. We have to charge fair market value, anti-donation clause, yada, yada, yada. And we'd go, you know, so because, you know, there's nothing wrong with a profit. You know, people need to be able to make money. But when, again, you're putting in broadband lines and cable, when it's not cost effective, there's no motivation to do so. We want to be able to use the money that we're receiving right now to be able to invest. So that's something that I felt very strongly about and worked hard to get through this year. And happily it happened. That's mostly what I'll focus on. There were some other bills that I carried. All of them were signed, yay. So for me, it was a success. I feel it was a successful session. On the whole, it was just grueling. It was just, it was grueling for reasons I still am pondering. But we did get some significant legislation through. There were disappointments, of course. There were election bills, some very important election bills that got stalled at the end. Again, the hydrogen hub thing was a very controversial issue. The Green Amendment was out there, which created a lot of controversy, and I will tell you now I'm not a big supporter of it for reasons that I'd be happy to explain at some point in time. But happy to hear questions at this point.
Any questions? Mr. Watt?
So the hydrogen bill, which relates to my question, do you think the state has done enough on really doing a systems analysis for the transition from fossil fuels to renewables and nuclear?
Yeah.
That's a difficult issue that most countries and most states have not addressed.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a fair criticism. That bill, that program was sprung, I think most of us felt was sprung on us. And there was a lot of talk for those of us who wanted to give it a fair reading, to put it off this year and do a thorough analysis of the problems and what would need to be done to resolve those problems. The point that was being made by the environmental groups is the hub itself may be environmentally sound and not have a lot of emissions. But the whole chain along the way, in terms of methane release, is high, and we need to do, as you said, a systems analysis to understand that better. I will say this, and I want to give kudos to the Environment Department. In the last year or two, they issued a methane rule that is one of the strongest methane rules in the country. And I believe the feds are looking at our rule as a model. So we are aware of the fact that the methane needs to be managed better, manage is a bad term. The companies need to get a handle on that, and the leaks have to be resolved. But I'm anticipating that if this is pursued, and I have heard that the governor is working on a regional basis now, part of the driver in moving so quickly, I think, was the fact that there's federal money available in large amounts, like billions of dollars that states will have access to. And that is why I think the governor jumped on it so quickly without maybe doing the necessary groundwork. Even those of us who look for ways to support these things were struggling because of unresolved issues that need to be resolved before we can support the initiative. For sure, Bill.
So between the session, before the 60-day session, are there any committees that are going to be looking at that issue?
Yes.
And my understanding is that the governor was looking to partner with Colorado, which also has very good methane rules and has had for many years, and then Wyoming and Utah.
Yes.
And so if we could come up with we could be the role model for the rest of the country and actually the world if we can come up with a really good systems analysis.
Yes, and I believe Senator Stefanik, who's really a good senator, and I want to give her, toot her horn. She's a very thoughtful person and intelligent. She used to represent, I think, part of White Rock some years ago. She has talked about the need for looking into this more fully before we jump on the hydrogen hub thing. So if Senator Stefanik takes it on, I feel pretty comfortable that it's going to get a good look-see. And I will talk to her about that. We do talk.
It seems like a great opportunity to leverage the expertise at the national labs, Los Alamos and Sandia, and also the Renewable Energy Lab up in Golden.
Well, one of the things is this carbon capture.
Right.
And before the session, because I knew this was coming up, I did get a briefing by the lab folks, and they tell me it's doable. Right now, it's not economical, but I mean that's not unusual with innovative, when you're cutting edge stuff. Sometimes you have to subsidize it before it's viable. But right now, it's not economically viable. But supposedly, in certain circumstances, it works. That's what the experts are saying. So at least some of the experts. It's the problem. Some experts and some not. Yeah. Anyone else?
I have a question in the chat.
Oh, okay.
What do you think about the governor vetoing the junior spending bill yesterday?
Oh, yes. Not happy. My cell phone text messaging started to explode in about the middle of the afternoon yesterday. I have some colleagues that we kind of talk a lot, and that one just popped right open. We are very disappointed about the governor's action on that. So a lot of people probably don't know what the junior bill is. It was like a whole strange world to me a few years ago when I actually learned there's such a thing as a junior bill. So we have the main bill, that's House Bill 2 every year. That's our big appropriations bill. That's a bill that's been studied and, all summer and fall. And, we've come up, our chairwoman puts together a beautiful package like I described earlier. And that funds all the departments and all these initiatives. Well, sometimes we're in such, how do I want to say this, financial strong position, which is what we are right now, is individual legislators get an allocation where they have particular projects that they feel are important in their districts. And we all got, I want to say something like $330,000 to be able to share with parts of our district. So for example, $50,000 I gave to the Los Alamos Health Council. I assigned to the Los Alamos Health Council. They had asked, the county supported the request. Okay, happy to do it. That's an important thing for the community. $80,000 I assigned to Cuba Public Schools so they could purchase computer equipment for their students, things like that, okay? These are important things, and they're small things, so they often aren't going to make it into a big budget where you're talking millions of dollars. But for Cuba to get $80,000, that's a big deal. They're a very poor school district, and they have a very high Native American population. So we're trying to help. I said, what can I do to help? I can use the money. Okay, this is what we'll do. So I did that. My colleagues across the state were doing similar things. My colleague Damon Eli gave money to an immigration program at UNM Law School, okay? Bought a van, things like that. I mean, these are important things. Okay, all of us got about that amount of money. Senators got more money, and it's a long story. But the entire package, $50 million, was vetoed. The entire thing. No, well, this is a silly thing, hair bonnets or something, I don't know. These are silly things I'm going to line item. She did not line item anything. She just wiped out the whole package. Not a good thing to do. And people are very unhappy about it. I don't know what we're going to do. There's talk of a special session. We'll see if we can get the votes. You need a lot. It's called an extraordinary session, and the legislature has the ability to call their own session. Normally, we rely on the governor because you need a supermajority to have an extraordinary session. But there is widespread discontent over what happened. Some important things didn't get funded that were important to individual legislators. And I'm a little baffled as to why it was done.
Did she state any reason?
She thinks it's a bad way to do policy, funding. Well, it's a bad way to fund things, which, I mean, it has merit. I get that. We did have a review process. We did have to present our proposals to a subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee so that they met certain criteria. We can't do, like I said, we don't want to do silly things, right? So things that are legitimately fundable. We had a little bit of a review, and if something looked like maybe it wasn't quite right or, fit the criteria, the Appropriations Subcommittee would let you know, and you'd have to talk to them about what how that could be fixed. She just doesn't think, she said it wasn't a good way to do business, which may be the case, and if that was her position, maybe she should have told us that last junior bill, because this is not our first junior bill. We had one, I think, 2 years ago. And, you know, maybe say, okay, guys, I'm signing at this time, but let's talk during the interim about a better process, you know, something like that.
Well, this leads me to the question of what are the issues between having these small sessions, a month or a month and a half, or 2 months and a month and a half, versus full-time senators and representatives? What are the main blocks to having full-time?
The New Mexico Constitution. That's a big block. Yeah, so we, a number of us, you know, there are many people in the House and Senate now looking at proposals that would have to be a change in the state constitution. But we're looking at it, and I think this 60-day, there will be proposals that will zero in on doing that. And people talk about 90-day sessions, and maybe alternate between 60 and 90. I mean, there's a variety of things we've talked about. We've talked about salaries for legislators, because as I said, you know, I'm a retired person from the lab. You know, this is great for me. You know, I'm productive. I have the wherewithal to be able to absorb the costs of doing the job. But, you know, if you want a 40-year-old who's approaching the kind of pinnacle of their career, and that's, you know, 40 to 55 is when you're really focusing on, I think, your incomes and so on. And it's hard to do. It's just very hard to do. And it's, I think, a little unfair to ask people to do that, who are just, you know, who have, they're middle class, working people, so on. It's just, and what the outcome is, it's harder to have a variety of viewpoints and demographics, because most people are my age, and I mean, and older, in their 70s and stuff, who are doing it, and they're doing a great job. But it would be nice to have some variety, because I learn from the 35-year-old that sits next to me on the floor, and and she is, you know, one person over. I learn stuff from her, because I'm not in that mix of ideas, and I'm like, you guys really, I'm like, you little millennials, you really think this stuff? You know, really? And I get it, and you know, okay, so I get educated, and that's a good thing, right? You know, I have to hear that. I mean, I love all of you, but I need to hear some more from the millennials and the 20 years old and all of that. So, yes, ma'am.
Well, speaking of millennial, I would consider myself a millennial. I consider myself on the cusp of Gen X. But I also I have a question, but before I get to that, I just want, because a lot of things that you mentioned in your summary, like, are my true passions. My sister's a VR nurse, and so that hit hard.
Yeah.
Finally, my brother-in-law is a detective up here, and my partner is currently trying to get a job as a police officer. That's been his lifelong journey. And so all the stuff you said that are, you know, the state's working towards to hitting those areas are commendable, and definitely kudos to you. The one thing that I didn't know about until acquaintance sent something to me the other day about the governor signing the bill for free college tuition. And I tried to do some research, but it was really vague about where the funding was coming from.
Oh, yeah.
I was wondering if you knew anymore, or if you could comment.
Yes, and I'll ask Cindy to help me if I don't understand. We had a lot of, as I said earlier, a lot of money coming into the state from the oil and gas industry. And the allocation that we made this year, and I want to say, was it like 60 million into the fund, Cindy? What is a one-time allocation. We are going to need to continue to look for ways to continuing the funding on that opportunity grant.
So it's the opportunity.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah, and if you go, I'm sure if you Google it, and remember, it was just signed, I think maybe yesterday or the day before. So the higher ed department will be putting together materials, I'm sure, in terms of how you apply, and you do have to, there are a few criteria, like you have to maintain a 2.5 grade point average and some things like that. You have to but it's very flexible in the number of credit hours that you take. I think you only have to take 6 credit hours to be eligible. Yeah. So,
You asked an excellent question.
yeah.
There's the passage of the legislation, and the opportunity clause that has passed for the past 2 years. And then there's the funding. And so one of the things that we've had is limited funding. This year, because of the abundance of federal money, one-time money, then there's sufficient funding. But there is concern about what happens next year. And so
Right.
we're hoping that if enrollments in the state have declined in colleges, and we have businesses that want to come in and do business in our state that aren't sure they have a qualified workforce. So how do we help bring the qualified workforce and make it available? And I think that's what we hope happens, is that we are able to show this year, with adequate funding, that this makes a difference in our state. It makes a difference to the individuals, it makes a difference to the state entirety. But your question is spot on, and that was one of the challenges through the session, is where will the funding come
Right,
from?
right.
And how will it be funding, and will it be adequate? And while I'm speaking, I also have to say that Representative Chandler is very modest. Not only is she doing all-nighters, but occasionally I was there on Saturday.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
On Sundays. It is impressive to watch, but it's also, you realize that maybe the 30-day session might be enough sometimes, because I don't think you guys can keep up this pace for 90
Yeah, this is true, but I think we'd be able to be a little, we'd spread out some of this. I hope we wouldn't be doing 90 days of chaos, you know.
Same pace.
Yeah, exactly.
One other question.
Sure.
Regarding the Opportunity Scholarship.
Uh-huh.
Is it just for college degrees, or can
No,
for certificates for
yes,
quality
yes,
and,
yes.
on-the-job training?
Yes, well, I don't know about the on-the-job, and maybe Cindy knows, but certainly certificates, because we have been championing certificate programs, and I know UNMLA participates in some of those, and because as Cindy said, you know, this is an all-hands-on-deck kind of an operation. College degrees are great, we know that, and it's life enriching and career enriching and all this, but also people want training. We don't have a trained workforce in the state, sufficiently trained to attract companies and so on. So that is has been one of the impediments for quite some time. We now have the money to help support that, and that's what part of this is. So certificates, yes.
Yeah, I taught at the high school for years, and I taught career explorations, and many of my students weren't on the college path.
Yeah,
It was not
that's right.
something that was going to be feasible for them educationally or financially, but some of them had a knack for the trades. And so, and I know
Yeah,
it's
it's great.
not only in Minnesota, but are dying everywhere. And it's a little passion.
Totally, and you know, some of the trade unions have apprentice programs, and they have been partnering with the schools as well. So they have been stepping up too, because we need electricians and plumbers and the whole pipe fitters, the whole array. The lab is looking for people, you know, so I mean, it's all over where we need to be supporting these kinds of activities, no question about it.
Thank you.
Sure. Anyone else? Bill? Mr. Colsa?
A few years ago, when we had the popular senator and the federal government, he spoke down in the valley to a group of Sikhs. And I approached him on the question of the, I forget what I call them, but the local community.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that have been here for hundreds of years are used to talking to their uncle and getting a job, and education was not in their picture. He took it as an offense. He says, we have in this state the labs, yada, 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 but he ignored answering my question. And I think, and I still see this big gap, like you're talking about finding plumbers, training. And I was a reader down in Santa Fe, 2008, somewhere around there. And I saw these people coming in at lunchtime. They have tremendous programs in the state.
Yep.
Tremendous programs, and free. Then they pay for you while they pay for the program, and you can work as like an intern and get paid at the same time. But I don't see it being approached from, it's just throwing out money. And
Well, actually, UNM's been doing programs that are certificate and trade programs.
they're up here.
Well, at New Mexico College, it has a lot of programs that are similar like to what you're talking about. So and the state's been helping with those, but they've been partnering, as I said, with the trade unions and others to ensure that we're training people. Northern New Mexico College, UNMLA works a lot with the lab. On and programs, and Cindy, I'm sure, would be happy to talk to you about what they're doing, but definitely that, certainly in the last 4 years, which is what I can speak to most, knowledgeably, since that's when I've been in office, we've been doing that. It's not just throwing money, there are programs that are doing that, and
The junior college in Albuquerque, Central.
yeah, they have programs. The unions have been going to the high schools talking to students about what their options are. And because, frankly, the trade unions are looking for people to be able to continue on the tradition of trades in this state. They've been going to high school students saying, this is what we have to offer. Because as one of the previous questioners said, there are a lot of people who either don't want to go to college because that's not their thing, aren't suited to college, or there's a whole array of reasons, or want to start earning money right away, and apprenticeship programs allow for that. So we are expanding the options for students across the state, and now with the Opportunity Scholars, all up and down, age-wise,
Do you see the motivation?
Well, I guess
Not
that.
the motivation from you,
Oh yeah, no.
but the motivation from the high school kids.
Well, that's harder for me to answer because I'm not.
Just briefly, we
Bill?
started a scholarship
Yeah.
program this year, this spring, with UNMLA, that Cindy can speak more about, that we call the SEED program. And chamber businesses, chamber members, could have students that work for them take classes at UNMLA for free, so there are some amazing programs out there, so.
Bill.
On that, nationally, there's a big push on career technical education. That's also true in this state. And I know Secretary Steinhaus is really pushing it. There are a lot of, at the Alamos Foundation, I serve on the board, we have a college and career pathways program, and we're actually getting data from all the regional high schools about pathways that, so as you get to high school, there are opportunities to move on in healthcare, like in Capitol High is a great program moving on into healthcare. There's the Building Trades Union in Albuquerque has a great program.
Yeah.
One of the high schools on West Mesa, and so there is a major movement on, and it's involving the public education department, the high schools. So I think things are going in the right direction now, which was not true 10 years ago.
Yeah, there is a huge push on this front, and there's kind of as I said, there's all hands on deck where people really are partnering, with the various organizations, contractors, trade unions, the lab, the schools, there's definitely a shared interest in pursuing that. That is what's going to turn around the state economically. Getting the trades, getting a trained workforce. That is what has been what's impeding us.
People would love to come, there's people that would love to come into the state, but they don't have the training.
Yes, that's right.
They see the publicity from Albuquerque.
Right. That's true. That's true. Yes, ma'am.
I just have a comment about that, just because since I worked at high school, I saw many contacts there. And this is one of the first years that they brought trades and people, but it took that trade person to go to the high school,
Yeah.
to be like, hey, can I talk to your kids that would be interested? So it takes a whole lot more than them
For sure.
I have a trade. I would love to be able to have an apprentice or teach someone about this, or maybe just give them a little bit of information on what it involves, like an information session at the high school. They've been, from what I hear, they've been really popular this year, and there's been a good showing.
That's great.
At Alamos High School, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Because when I was working there was no trades, and I'm like, why not?
Yeah.
But it takes the community to show and put a voice in and want to give their time back to these students who are in desperate need of some kind of guidance in the future because they know college isn't for them. They want to get, from my own experience, my sister needed a hands-on job, a trade, and now she's started as a paramedic and now she's a full-fledged nurse. But it takes different steps, and so many kids are unique, they can't, that's another, soapbox for me.
Any other questions?
I'll just,
Sure.
Okay, we'll talk some more. Yeah,
Okay.
I just want to thank you all. This was great. I enjoyed the dialogue, and I'm very optimistic about the state right now. I truly am, and you can see it. I have a passion for it, and there are a lot of committed people in the legislature. I can't tell you how wonderful many of my they're serious, hardworking people, and we really are trying to come together to support everyone
Well,
in
we
the state.
thank you very much for coming today.